Well, what makes people want to change? What's the one thing that finally gets people to the point of change? Pain, right? Pain is God's way of screaming at you. Nobody changes until the pain of what you're doing is bigger than the reward that you get. People aren't motivated to change. People are not. The big book says we become as willing as only the dying can be to do the work that's necessary to change, to start grieving the loss of our relationship with alcohol and drugs. In other words, we go, we can't imagine life with alcohol and drugs, but we can't imagine it without it either. Both choices seem pretty crappy right now, okay? That's where most of us have to get before we're really willing to make a change, okay? And it's the same way with the person that's enabling. You know, an addict, until my mom cut me off, what's my motivation to get better or quit? My dad's a millionaire, and he's had 8 DUIs in California and still has a driver's license. Tell me how. And he tells me I can't be a drunk because I can pay my bills. He's 77, right?
Greasy palms.
What's that? Greasy palms, yeah. So money can get you out of it. If you got enough money, even Thomas Jefferson wrote, justice remains the domain of God alone, and that the legal system is comprised of the arts of persuasion and finance. It's a business. And the one thing I know about any business, it's easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new one. Okay, once they got you, we've all talked about in here before, right? The only power you have in the legal system is to give them no what? Ammunition. Because they have authority over you at that point. And anybody with authority over you can make your life hell. Get a crappy boss, grow up with a crappy parent. Okay? Like, get a PO. That's crappy. My last PO, he looked at when I went to go see him the first time, I've been 8 years on probation on and off, right? 8 arrests. And he looks at my thing, and he looks at the sheet, and he goes, really? Really? He goes, you know what? He goes, people like you don't make it. And he goes, you know what you are to me? And I said, what? He said, you are 20 pieces of paperwork. And I said, what does that mean? He said, every time that I have to revoke somebody's probation, I have to fill out 20 pieces of paperwork to get your ass back in front of the judge. So he said, you know what? You know you're not going to make it. So here's the deal. I got a free night tonight. I'm going to go home and write up all the paperwork. I'm just going to leave the date open, and then whatever it was that you tested positive for. And he said, I'm going to write it up and come in tomorrow and I'm going to drop you. But please go get high tonight. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not getting high for you. I'm not going to prison. I'm going for 20 years minimum, the judge said, And he said, why are you wasting my time?
Because it's your job.
He said, why are you wasting my... He didn't care. He had a different idea what his job was than I did. But he had authority, and he didn't care. Well, of course it wasn't right.
I'm going to talk to a supervisor no matter what.
I talked to his supervisor. You know what his supervisor...
Respect, you're going to treat me with some semblance of respect, or you want to at least fake it.
Do you know what his supervisor said to me? His supervisor said, why don't I help him fill out the paperwork, Chris? That's what his supervisor said to me. I went to his supervisor right afterwards, and his supervisor said, okay, you know what? I'll help him fill out the paperwork. You know who his boss was? The judge who sentenced me.
Well, you got a boss too.
They didn't care.
You don't look at somebody's paperwork all the time. You can't judge the price covered, but for the 8 years on probation, which is violation.
Oh, yeah.
Locked up, back out.
Uh-huh.
So what's the odds that it do
Over
on
and
the
over.
same case? Was it the same case?
No, it was a different...
But anyway, 8
Kept
years
getting
on
at it.
probation, violation going back and forth. You are going to use. That's
So-
pretty much the deal.
But I didn't.
Waste their time with somebody you know they.
Yeah, but you know what I didn't? And you know what? I haven't used since, right? I haven't used since that day. But he looked at me and he goes, so I came in, right? And I said, well, I'm not going to use, so I don't have to come back, right? And he said, come back anyway. So I came back the next morning, and I beat in the cup, did whatever, and it came back clean. And he looked at me and he goes, damn. Just like that, right? He goes, damn. He made me come for 2 years, 3 times a week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then in New York, they had this thing at the time where if you were on the probation I was on, that they could call you 24/7 and you had 2 hours to get there. Because they had night court. It's New York City, so they got 24-hour court, 24-hour probation. And so 20 minutes, 2 hours, you had to be there. And if you weren't there, it was an automatic dirty drop within 2 hours. You could be working. So you had to have an agreement with whoever you worked with, right? Okay, they were pretty much done. Okay, at that point, and so, you know, we're really powerless when we're in the system, except for turning ammunition over.
Sorry, all the probation talk. I just got off probation today.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Now, that right there for me was always a trigger to use. Because celebration, right? Celebration can be a trigger to use. Even the good times, right? So I was always like, my sponsor, we planned when I got off probation. He said, we're going to a meeting. We're going to go. You're going to see me every day for like 3 days after you get off probation, you know? Because he said, you know, you never have to get arrested or drink or use again. There are people that never get back on probation. I was like, well, that ain't my life. He said, well, it doesn't have to be, right? So the second thing people learn how to do is they learn how to improve their communication skills, okay? Whatever age you are that you start drinking and using on a regular basis, that's usually where your social development and your emotional development stops. So that when you get sober, like whatever age that you started depending on alcohol and drugs more for like I started at 10. So when I got sober at 24, I was a 10-year-old, basically. I acted like a 10-year-old. I threw temper tantrums and I pouted and I did this whatever. And like I was everything but hold my breath till I turned blue, right? And I'll show you. I mean, I was like a whiny little kid. And my sponsor said, God, you chapped my ass, Chris. Oh, God. He says, what are you? Oh, he goes, oh, that's right, you're 10. He says, but it's not going to take you that long to catch up if you learn some things, right? Okay? So one of the things is that if you grow up in households where it's my way or the highway and parents don't teach you how to negotiate and there's not a lot of healthy communication, parents tend to take on, in dysfunctional families, tend to take on either passive or aggressive communication styles. And we're not really taught how to be assertive or to negotiate or to ask for what we need, you know, to really resolve conflict in a healthy way. And you know, when I got sober, like I was like not in a relationship for 5 years, and I got in a relationship and all of a sudden I realized I don't know how to deal with conflict. I was locking myself in the bathroom and, come on out, we need to talk. I said, you better leave me alone. And we went to therapy and they said, my therapist said, how did you know when conflict was over at your house, Chris, growing up? And I said, well, who was ever standing and bleeding the least? You know, my partner started laughing and our therapist said, look, he is not laughing. He's not kidding. Can you at least thank him for like just locking himself in the bathroom and not kicking your ass? Because I'm pretty sure he could take you. Okay, I didn't know any other way of doing it, resolving conflict. When you grow up there are 3 rules in an overwhelmed or addicted family growing up. Don't trust, don't feel, and don't talk about it. So you're not taught to negotiate. You're not allowed to talk about your feelings. You're not allowed to communicate really and ask for your needs to be met. Because in an overwhelmed family, I don't like that word dysfunctional, but overwhelmed families, the rules change every day, depending on who's ever in charge usually. Okay? But for that day, they're rigid, but it could be totally different tomorrow. So you can't predict what's going to happen. So we grow up. Most people, if you grow up in a family where it's my way or the highway and you're not allowed to negotiate, you learn how to get sneaky and get passive aggressive. And you learn how to lie. You know, I always have parents that come in and go, how come my kid lies all the time? And I said, you trained him that way. They go, what? I go, yeah, if you teach your kid how to negotiate for privileges and responsibility, all that kind of stuff, and you're open and, you know, you practice discipline and not severe punishment, you make it an environment where they can communicate with you, they don't have to lie. But if they know there's nothing they can do to get what they want, because it all depends on your mood that day, they're going to start going, it's your way or the highway? Okay, sure, Dad, whatever you say. Is he gone? Good. I'm going to go do what I want to do, right? All right? That's what happens in dysfunctional families, especially when there's no negotiation with the parents. Okay? Yeah, and most of us grew up that way because, you know, our parents weren't taught that way either.
Some issues are non-negotiable.
Well, yeah, because, and kids even know that, right? Kids know that. Kids come into my office when they come to see me in private practice. I say, why do you like coming here? And they go, Chris, I know I can't get my way all the time, but my parents don't even let me be upset. I come home and have a bad day from school and I'm just in a bad mood. My parents just tell me to cheer up. You know, if my dad came home from a bad mood at work and I told him, hey, I didn't ask to be born, what the hell's the matter with you? Get your shit together and go out there and bang out the bills and the mortgage and the rent and everything else and come home with a smile on your face and be happy to see me, you ass. If I said that to my dad, he would kick my ass. But I come home in a bad mood, my parents tell me, you better stop being in a bad mood, you better just cheer up, and what do you have to complain about? You know, like I come home and I say, he's like, I'll give you an example, because I came home the other day and asked this girl out and she turned me down, right? And I was just in a bad mood. And my dad said, what are you upset about? He said, well, I asked this girl out and she didn't want to go out with me. And he said, well, if you weren't such a loser, maybe she'd want to go out with you. He didn't even sit there. And then he said, you know, why would some girl want to go out with you anyway? Because you never help around here, you're not responsible, you're not this, you're not a good, you know, whatever. You don't follow through, you don't whatever. They know what kind of person you are. And I thought, whoa, all he had to say was, I'm sorry. That looks like it sucks. And he goes, I like coming here, Chris, because I can be myself.
Okay, I'm a little confused right now because like it was a statement made and it kind of made it sound like that the person's never been wrong. You know, like sometimes you don't get a chance to resolve things. You know, something, somebody does something and you may want to correct it or you may want to get your respect.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, well, I'll just talk about me. I had a situation when I was 15 years old where a guy spit on the floor and told me to get it up. When I went to the supervisor said, well, get it up. You know, he said another word.
Yeah.
You know, this was back in the 70s. It was my first experience at working.
Oh.
There was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we're all in situations where times that we can't do things, okay? That's going to be life, right?
Yeah, that's what I just
Okay.
said. So you
But
know it's
the,
gonna get me.
but we're talking about, like, that's setting boundaries. That's what we're going to talk about that in a minute, okay? But when you got to think about when you're communicating, like feelings, and you're communicating, expressing, you know, what you want, what you need from people, sometimes you have to consider the source. Okay, some people are not worth your time and energy investing in because what you're doing is you're giving them ammunition. Okay, some people are not healthy to give ammunition to. That's usually your feelings. Okay, I'm not going to go up to my boss and sit there and say, you know what, when you talk to me that way, it hits this wound of when my dad used to, like, you know, make me hold a revolver to my head and, you know, play Russian roulette and do all this other kind of, like, I'm going, I mean, I would just give him ammunition, right? Like, oh, he's up. Okay, like, what's up with him, you know, whatever. Okay, so, like, I'm not going to do that with somebody like that. Okay, but if I have somebody in my life that I'm close to that's yelling at me and screaming at me, when we're calm, I'm going to be able to go back later and say, you know, when you yell at me like that, it really hits every wound that I have from my past, and that does not work for me. I need you not to talk to me that way. Okay, that's a healthy boundary setting right there. Okay, there's a difference with that. That's an assertive statement. Okay.